Hey there, folks. I'm Joshua Orro, the Mustang Prince, and welcome to Mustang Prince Orro Reports. And welcome to part 2 of my 80s movie marathon. Now, firstly, let's talk about a young reviewer whom I follow named Brandon Nichols, aka the Hardcore Kid. For those who aren't familiar with HK, he reviews lots of things. His persona is that of a kid who grew up with 80s rockers like the Ramones, for example, and a lot of BBC shows, including Father Ted. And of course, while his slogan may say that he's hardcore enough to review kids' movies, he occasionally divulges into internet videos like Robot Wars and Nightmare on Elm Street. Imagine if a 90s kid had his own review show if he was from the 80s. In the end, he usually gives a movie a score of hardcore hit for good movies or a hardcore headache for bad films. Sadly, nowadays, Hardcore Kid is not doing reviews monthly or weekly like he used to. Plus, a few years ago, Hardcore Kid became one of my closest friends on Facebook, and believe it or not, I was this close to meeting him in person while I was on vacation in Hershey, Pennsylvania last year. But, sadly, I missed him. My second subject is an animator whom I've talked about several times in my show, Don Bluth. Now, who could ever forget the man? An animator whom, during the 80s, left Disney, began his own animation studio, and made classics that were lovable, memorable, and traumatizing. And so far, I've already blogged films like An American Tail, The Land Before Time, and All Dogs Go to Heaven, including some of his 90s work like Anastasia and Rockadoodle. But, so, what do the Hardcore Kid and Don Bluth have to do with this blog? Well, today's blog is considered as Don Bluth's directorial debut, and it's been several years since Hardcore Kid did his review about it. But hey, I can do it too. Besides, it's from the 80s, so let's get started. Released on July 2nd, 1982, the movie is The Secret of NIMH. Now let's get started. Mrs. Brisby, a widowed mouse, must move her children out of their home in a field before the local farmer starts plowing. Unable to leave because her son is sick with pneumonia, Mrs. Brisby seeks the help of nearby rats who have heightened intelligence after being the subjects of scientific experiments. She receives an unexpected gift from the elder rat Nicodemus, but soon Mrs. Brisby is caught in a conflict among the rats, jeopardizing her mission to save her family. So, what do I think of this movie? Well, in my opinion, this movie is highly underrated. And while The Land Before Time is my favorite Don Bluth movie, I want to consider this movie as one of the greatest animated films from the 80s. But to further explain why I enjoy the movie, let's move on to Mustang notes. The movie was produced by Orro Productions and released by MGM for United Artists. The rights to the book, Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of NIMH, have reportedly been offered to Disney in 1972, but sadly, Disney turned it down. In September 1979, Don Bluth, along with other animators like Gary Goldman, John Pomeroy, and 8 other animation staff members, left Walt Disney Productions to set up their own independent studio called Don Bluth Productions. The studio worked at first out of Bluth's house and garage, but moved to a 2-story facility in Studio City, California, several months later. While they were still working at Disney, they produced this 27-minute short movie, Banjo, the Woodpile Cat, as a side project to gain other production skills that the company and their animation program were not addressing. Bluth asked Ron W. Miller, Walt Disney's son-in-law, and the president and CEO of the company at the time, to view Banjo, but unfortunately, Miller declined. Before they started making Banjo, artist and story writer Ken Anderson had been getting into Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH, which he called a wonderful story. He gave the book to Don Bluth for him to read and make a film out of after Bluth finished the animation direction of Pete's Dragon. Bluth later showed NIMH to Disney animator Wolfgang Reitherman, who turned down Bluth's offers to make a movie based on a book, stating, "We've already got a mouse named Mickey Mouse, and we've done a mouse movie called The Rescuers." However, Bluth also presented the novel to the other staff who would work for Don Bluth Productions later on, and they all loved it. 2 months later, former Disney executive James L. Stewart, who now had started Aurora Productions, called Goldman and told him about Anderson's idea of making a movie based on NIMH. At Bluth, Goldman, and Pomeroy's request, Aurora Productions acquired the film rights and offered Don Bluth Productions a budget of $5.7 million and 30 months to complete the movie. Tighter in both budget and schedule than most Disney animated features at the time. Bonus facts. The Mrs. Frisby name in the novel had been changed to Mrs. Brisby during production due to the trademark concerns of Frisby discs. The movie was followed in 1998 by a direct-to-video sequel called The Secret of NIMH 2: Timmy to the Rescue, which was sadly made without Bluth's involvement. But for more details on that, I'll have to save this movie for another time when I do a blog on it. Also, believe it or not, in 2015, it was reported that a CGI/live-action reboot to The Secret of NIMH will be in the works, and it makes me kind of interested on what it'll be like when said remake happens. Now, since I was introduced to this movie during my 5th grade year, I've noticed that this movie is pretty dark, which is common for movies during the 80s. However, in my opinion, the animation is very beautiful, and it feels like the style of animation that Walt Disney did before he died. However, in my opinion, the scariest parts of the movie is when a monstrous cat named Dragon attacks Mrs. Brisby, and when Farmer Fitzgibbons drives his tractor through the fields. But those parts aren't as dark as that scene where we see several lab rats get injected at the National Institute of Mental Health, or NIMH for short. Speaking of which, just recently, I discovered that NIMH actually exists. You see, NIMH is the largest research organization in the world, specializing in mental illness, and is responsible for biomedical and health-related research. The institute was first authorized by U.S. government in 1946 in Bethesda, Maryland, when President Harry Truman signed a law known as the National Mental Health Act. Although the institute was not formally established until 1949. Also, in my opinion, the great owl's tree looks very creepy, with bones, spiderwebs, and bugs everywhere. And the inside of the rose bush, where the rats of NIMH live, looks very mysterious. And I'm surprised that these rats have become highly intelligent and gained a slow aging process due to the experiments that they've been through. Plus, these rats depend on human technology to survive. And now, let's move on to the characters and the voice actors who brought them to life. Our main character, Mrs. Brisby, is voiced by Elizabeth Hartman. Sadly, this was Elizabeth's last movie before she committed suicide by jumping in 1987. Now, Mrs. Brisby is the widowed mother of Teresa, Martin, Cynthia, and Timmy. Her husband, Jonathan, was killed and eaten alive by Dragon, and she struggles to take care of her children by herself. Her main plot in the movie is to find a, society of lab rats to help her move her home to avoid destruction by Fitzgibbon's plow. Also, in my opinion, despite being sweet, Mrs. Brisby is shy and timid in the beginning, and she is very scared easily, especially by Dragon. But when Timmy became ill with pneumonia, she is, willing to do anything to save him. Next, we have Jeremy, a crow voiced by the late, great Dom DeLuise, who got to be in American Tail, All Dogs Go to Heaven, Oliver and Company, Spaceballs, The Muppet Movie, and The Magic Voyage. Now, Jeremy is a funny and clumsy crow who is allergic to cats and has a habit of getting himself tangled up. He also appears to get scared rather easily, and he seems to be faint-hearted of Dragon and the Great Owl. Despite this, however, he befriends the widow, Mrs. Brisby, and is shown to care for her very slightly. Next, we have Mrs. Brisby's neighbor, Auntie Shrew, voiced by Hermione Baddeley, who got to be in Disney's Mary Poppins and The Aristocats. Throughout this movie, Shrew is seen babysitting Mrs. Brisby's children. Shrew can be a close-minded, pish-posh busybody who takes it upon herself to ensure that all the wild animals on the farm are safe, even to the point of intrusiveness. Plus, she's shown to be quite brave, competent, and even athletic to some degree, when she managed to stop the plow from harming Mrs. Brisby and rescues her in the process. Next we come to Mr. Ages, voiced by Arthur Mallet, who got to be in films like Disney's Bedknobs and Broomsticks, The Black Cauldron, the 1995 Little Princess movie, and of course, John Carpenter's Halloween. Now, Mr. Ages is a loner who does not like visitors, and he's shown with a light blue cast on his leg. However, I do like the scene where Mr. Ages gives Mrs. Brisby medicine for Timmy, and I think it's interesting that he helped Jonathan rescue the rats from NIMH. Next, we come to the Great Owl, voiced by John Carradine. Now, this powerful bird seems monstrous at first, but he is very wise. The gray owl lives in the nearby woods. In the movie, the owl advises Mrs. Brisby to visit the rats of NIMH who live underneath a rose bush and ask for Nicodemus. Speaking of which, next we have the Wise Nicodemus, voiced by Derek Jacobi, best known from Nanny McPhee and the 2015 Cinderella movie. Like the other rats, Nicodemus was captured by man and was injected with some sort of experiment which gave him and the other rats human intelligence. After escaping NIMH, he became the prophet and leader of the rats. Nicodemus is also somewhat a wizard, judging by his items like a book, an amulet, and his crystal ball-like machine. He's also known as nice, independent, caring, organized, diligent, educated, modest, understanding, soft-spoken, noble, industrious, observant, dependable, empathetic, unselfish, and sweet. Next, we have the heroic Justin, voiced by Peter Strauss. Justin is the captain of the Rat Guards. In my opinion, Justin is my favorite character in the movie next to Jeremy. I also like the interaction between him and Mrs. Brisby, and I think he's a great supporting character, like when he assists Mrs. Brisby in drugging Dragon. However, I just can't believe that this movie got away with Justin saying damn when Mrs. Brisby got captured by the farmer's son Billy. Next, we have our main antagonist, Jenner, voiced by Paul Shenar. Many would describe Jenner as evil, cunning, scheming, manipulative, and even psychotic or sadistic. It is quite clear from early on that Jenner has some hostile intentions, but it is at the film's climax where he is shown his true colors by killing Nicodemus, trying to steal the stone from Mrs. Brisby, and battling Justin at the end of the movie. It is during these events that he seems to display a psychotic behavior. Finally, we have Mrs. Brisby's children. Teresa, voiced by Shannon Doherty, Martin, voiced by Will Wheaton, Cynthia, voiced by Jody Hicks, and Timmy, voiced by Ian Fried. And now, let's move on to my final words. Overall, The Secret of NIMH is a fantastic movie, and for being Don Bluth's first animated feature, this is his best work, next to the other animated films he worked on during the 80s. The animation is classical, the characters are memorable, while a few are very serious, the voice acting is phenomenal, and the music by Jerry Goldsmith is wonderful. Lastly, the story is dark, epic, mature, and thought-provoking, so I don't think little kids should watch this movie on their own. So, my best advice, just make sure you watch this movie with said children if you plan on having them watch it. As for my rating, I give this film a full 100%. And I pray that hopefully someday the hardcore kid and I will meet each other in person. Well, that's it for today, everyone. Be sure to join me again next time as we move away from MGM and on to the happiest place on earth, where we look into a mouse version of Sherlock Holmes. Mustang Power.